Good morning and a warm welcome to all of you to the Masterclass series organized by School of Media and Communication, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Dubai. I am Valma Sarao. The past few weeks, we have been interacting with the masters of cinema. And in today's session, we will be discussing on script writing with the master himself. Popular filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock once said, to make a great film, you need three things: the script, script, and script. In today's session, we have the privilege of interacting with Professor Anil Zankar, academician, writer, and popular filmmaker. He won a national award for his work Cinema Chi Goshta, focusing on filmmaking. He's also authored a book on the popular film Mughal-e-Azam named Mughal-e-Azam Legend as Epic. Anil Zankar taught script writing and direction at the popular Film and Television Institute of India for over 15 years and has also taught in prominent filmmaking institutions across India. He's also been a jury for prominent film festivals of India, particularly in Goa and Mumbai. We are very happy to have him here for this special masterclass where we will be focusing on various aspects of script writing and television narration. So here is a preview to the masterclass series. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Anil. We are very delighted to have you for this masterclass where you can give you the concept of an understanding of script writing, especially for all the enthusiasts who wants to venture into the journey of filmmaking.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you, Manipal Academy, for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you people and also to your students and whoever is listening. It's a very interesting topic which I've been working on a number of years. And you call me professor, but let me tell you, when it comes to writing, they're only students. So we generally students of cinema. There are no real professors because it's this one area or one craft where you keep learning, forever, basically. And it's a vast topic, but that's not an excuse because you gave me 1 hour. So I'll touch upon some of the important points which are based on my experience of watching films and teaching and also interacting with students. What is necessary for somebody who's interested in script writing to give a broad overview. So I think that is what the audience should also expect from me with some examples, etc. I'm not going to stick to one particular kind of filmmaking or like say I'm going to talk about how Indian films or the scripts are there only about Hollywood or say about Japanese film. It's not going to be a very specific kind of a film industry oriented kind of a talk. But what I intend to do instead is to present conceptually the process of writing. The applications will differ from area to area, etc. And from the film industry that you're working in, from the language that you're working in, from the setup that they're working in, they're very world over, basically. But there's something called the creative process and the adaptability of the writer and the skills the writer has got to have and the nature of film medium. What role does script writing exactly play out there? So for anybody who's interested in getting into script writing should be aware of, I think, this very broad spectrum, and then one can go one's own way. Happily, there are no, what shall I say, there are no very quick fixes or important formula that one can follow. This is the formula, like, I mean, this is what the shape of the script is. You have to do this, you have to do this. Life would be far more simpler and therefore uninteresting. So that's not the path along which I'm going to go down. But instead, sort of talk about the various possibilities of and the process of script writing, what it entails actually. The first slide that I think you are showing right at this moment is called Script Writing is Creative Writing. Yes. Now, talk about what is script writing. I'm using another term, which is, I'm calling it a creative writing. Now, let's go to the next slide. Says that creative writing has many forms, and script writing is one of them. So, writing a poem, writing a short story, writing a novel, writing a play, these are the most sort of known forms of creative writing that we have. And script writing also comes in that place. Script writing is not something that you write only for the films, and it has, I mean, I strongly believe that it has a lot of correspondence with the way you write. Writing's creative process.
Professor Anil, I guess there is a little bit of
Noise, yes. Yes. So I think all can hear me. So I'll continue. I said that it's a form of writing which is like it's a form of creative writing like the other forms, and only format that the writer delivers ultimately is different. Now, one thing that is common to writing a poem or a short story or a novel or a play and a film script is one element that one area which one domain which we can call it, they fall under, is fiction. And yes, I also want to make it clear that I will be talking about fiction script writing in this, because non-fiction is a completely different area, and it has more it has different considerations, and it's a topic, so one should not try to sort of include too many things within the limited time that we have. So I'll stick to fiction. So whenever people have any questions or reactions later on, I'm just clarifying the area that I'm talking about. Now, fiction is a term which very gloriously sometimes we say that it's imaginative, imaginary, realm of fantasy, so on and so forth. In a very negative sense, we say that this is fiction, meaning it's a lie. Fiction is also used in the sense of a lie. Don't tell me stories, cock and bull stories. This is something which we very colloquially use. Now, the slide here says that this is somebody is described. It's a very good phrase that fiction is truth inside a lie. Now, is there a contradiction in that? There isn't. For the simple reason that some of these masters of fiction, the next slide, if we come to, yes, that is, Camus has said that, fiction is the lie through which we can tell the truth. And what does Camus mean by this? He says that fiction is the lie, which means that whatever is created, fiction is self-contained. The characters that they live and the stories, no matter how realistic they may seem to us, how close they may seem to us, how much we can identify with those people, it doesn't matter. But they do not exist. They're imaginary characters, basically. So let me give you a very famous example. Richard Attenborough made this film Gandhi in 1982. Now, is it a fiction or a documentary? It's a fiction, clearly. Because the person that you see as Mahatma Gandhi on the screen is an actor called Ben Kingsley, and the filmmaker himself says so. There are so many things also in terms of happenings of the script, the way they are scripted. Some of the happenings in South Africa were actually filmed in Pune, in Ferguson College. Some of the badge burning sequence and the protest meeting were shot in the amphitheater in the Gymkhana ground of the Ferguson College, which is supposed to be a South African happening. So these are the things that we do. So is this a lie? Yes, it is a lie. We are not looking at things in South Africa. But why did it feel, and why did the audience accept it? The audience did not know where that location was. It could have been a set as well. But the fact is that Ferguson College was set up in 1885, around that time. So the architecture, the amphitheater, the ground, the rawness, everything matched with what the British colonial period architecture was. And it was convenient to shoot it. So that's the nature of filmmaking. So filmmaking is not just uh, making sort of copies of what exists. Also, for the fiction, the first ground rule is that even if it's based on true story, which is not an important criterion at all, everything that way is based has some roots in reality. But it's not like for a fiction writer, he doesn't think whether he has to stick to the reality or the story as he has received. What you bring to the table is the insights into the characters or what an artist communicates. It's not that experience itself, but his knowledge of the experience. That's what makes the difference between a writer and an ordinary man telling the story. For him, it would be just the details of the story. This happened, this happened, this happened. But it is a writer who actually gives you some insights into the characters, into the times. Then you begin to think about the motivation. Why did this character say it like this and acted like this? Why did things happen the way that it happened? The author provides the logic from his own understanding of life and society in general. So therefore, it is a lie in the sense that it exists for itself. So therefore, these definitions on which broadly people provide different definitions, but on this all authors seem to agree on definition of fiction. You look at what Gabriel Garcia Marquez also said. Fiction was invented the day Jonah arrived home and told his wife that he was 3 days late because he had been swallowed by a whale. Now it's quite self-explanatory how far-fetched a thing that could be. And so I think it says what it says. So then we go into the realm of fiction. So when we talk about fiction, and there are other elements that come in. Another term that I want to introduce here is that all fiction is actually narrative. So we began with this idea of fiction, and all fiction is narrative. Now, what exactly is a narrative? Narrative can have very different meanings in different senses. Narratives are not necessarily verbal narratives. Narratives can be in pictorial art. So we have literary narratives, we have visual narratives, we have performance arts, and we have cinema. Cinema comes right at the end of it. So therefore, it's the youngest art, barely about 125 years old today as we talk. And the other arts have had hundreds, thousands of years of history. So cinema actually got the legacy of all these arts, and it incorporates then the various elements of these various arts, to make them into one. But scholars have always been sort of possessed with this question about how is the evolution of art and how the fiction has evolved. A lot of people have believed this to be a part of the evolution, the storytelling. These people have E.M. Forster was a famous novelist, and he's written a book, Aspects of the Novel. In that, he says that the whole birth of the story and other things at the fireplace or in the caves, people used to go in different directions. At the end of the day, they would meet, and what did they have? They had stories to tell each other. A lot of biologists and other scientists have considered fiction to be a product of human intelligence, very closely related to the growth. And you can see that the earliest stories that human beings told were very, very simple, like folk tales, 1 page, 2 page, and supernatural happenings, fantastic characters, nothing explained. From there, we come to these very complex modern forms like novels, plays, and cinema. A lot of it is experimental. So there's a whole world which is centuries are really encoded in that. So when we talk about script writing, we have to be aware of there's a kind of tradition, a long and a very distant tradition which comes to cinema from various other arts. And scholars have been trying to sort of find similarities between these various arts. And there was this famous historian who wrote in Marathi. He was called Ityasacharya Rajwade. And in 1919, exactly about 100 years before, he wrote an article, The Evolutions of the Means of Thought and Expression. It was in Marathi. And he said that all forms of artistic communication have evolved from core natural abilities that human beings possess. The First of them was to express by means of speech, language developed. Gesture, says things gesturally. The ability to draw. And the fourth was the ability to make solid forms, from where poems, pots, so many things develop. So let's go to the next slide and see how he tabulates them. He tabulates them in a very interesting manner, actually. On the left, if you look at, he looks at the natural, he posts the natural ability, which is the sound. Now, he says that the functional use of sound leads to language. I mean, what's the time? You want information. So, where are you going? When are you going? What is the time, etc. So on and so forth. It's the functional use. Evocative use is, he says, is singing. We make verses and go from there, which is not a functional use. Then functional plus evocative use, he says, is verse. And then external means is that those who could not sing, when we learned tool making, people made instruments and still made music, which comes out of the tools, which we call as instruments, which have developed. So this is the lineage along which it develops. So it's secondly is the second element he says is the drawing. Now the first thing that he puts to the language is alphabet. Now the Chinese and Japanese alphabets, we call them hieroglyphics. They are still the ones which have retained their old form, because earlier all alphabets were like having very pictorial forms. Later on, we come to these abstract forms like in Devanagari, Roman, and even Indian script. That is a much later development. Earlier on, evocative use of that led to painting, illustrated books which combine word and very interestingly, he puts photography as an extensive attach. So you had another instrument invented, which is called camera for making images. So photography comes in that lineage. And earlier in 1919, the films were silent. Sound came later on. And gesture, I mean, acting, obviously, dance, very codified structure, theater, there's plays, and the puppetry, external means. I mean, puppetry is also theater. Then the fourth element is solid figure, the pottery which developed for cooking and so many functional things initially. Sculpture, look at the other word, architecture, functional as well as artistic. Then the landscape, town planning, all this is the kind of evolution which has happened from there. So these are these various elements. Now we'll see how they come to combine later on when we talk about cinema. Now here is just to give a diversity, the graphic you can check up later on. The graphic needs a little explanation, which I'm having. This is a graphic by a French artist designer called Minard. It's a brilliant depiction of Napoleon's attack on Russia. This is the same moment where military expedition, which Napoleon took to Russia, and came back very empty-handed and with a lot of. It was a very disastrous kind of campaign that we can talk about. Tolstoy's famous novel War and Peace is based upon this event. Tolstoy was writing that novel. It's a monumental novel having more than 550 characters. It took him 6 years to finish the novel through various drafts ultimately. It's such a massive work based on this experience. Now here, what this man does is that this needs a little explanation, but you can check it out on the net. It's given as one of the very brilliant examples in design execution. If you look at the graphic, the portion there on the left, when it begins at the broadest, you have a little brown color kind of a thing, expedition, where it actually begins. At the beginning on the left-hand side, there's the breadth of that. That is the path, and where the two portions meet, the black portion and the brown portion where they meet, that is where the Moscow city is. So Napoleon took an army of 4 lakh people. The breadth of that brown segment denotes the number. And as you see that as he advances towards Moscow, the number goes on decreasing, decreasing, decreasing. And it further goes on decreasing when you get into the black path, which is the return journey. And finally, only 10,000 return out of 4 lakhs which get. So you can see the massive damage and what a colossal kind of an effort in story there would have been. So what Tolstoy did in writing a great novel, this man did with a great graphic in just one this thing. Of course, this has been considered as the best kind of example of ever of any statistical graph that has been presented, which communicates so much with and such a complex phenomenon. He's got shades of that as the thing develops. As the thing sort of rolls out, he plotted various points along that how many soldiers, how many people lost, what were the reasons, where it was flood or it was a battle, all that, all that gave a comprehensive picture, like in one painting or in one graphic. He was trying to cover such a large area. So the point is that there are varieties of ways of looking at an idea, can take various forms and it can grow in various different ways. So before we come to the story, I'll just change tracks here slightly, and I want to show you a couple of clips from films, which are very well-known films. And what I want to show you is I'll explain the reasons for that. The first clip that I'm going to show you is from Kieślowski's film, Kieślowski's first feature film, the famous Polish filmmaker. It is called The Amateur, or it was called The Camera Buff. Kieślowski made a lot of documentaries before he made this particular film. This is his first feature film. It's about, it's a very simple story. It can happen, anybody can relate to it. And this, you must remember, this happened in socialist Poland. So in 1979, the controls were very strict. He buys an amateur camera somewhere, a film camera, there was no video those days, and not accessible to people anyway in that format like they are today. And he starts filming on his own. He's not really a trained cameraman or a creative person. Out of curiosity, he picks up the gadget and actually starts filming, and how it changes his life. He's working in a factory and he starts filming. So apart from factory, his life changes, his role changes, his attitude to life changes. He comes into the realm of what we call as cinema, and so on and so forth. So that is how the story goes. But what I want you to sort of, I'm screening the very beginning of the film, so I don't think you will miss, any part, or it doesn't need any pre sort of knowledge of the film. What I would like you to see is that how the story moves through. It's like one day compressed into about 5 minutes, And what I just want you to see broadly is, and remember, is the sequencing of what happens in those things. As I told you, like it's a whole day, 12 hours maybe or more, compressed into a 5-minute kind of clip. So what is the logic of this? And we'll return to this later on in the course of our doing, but I just want you to watch these details. So Vilma, can we have the clip, please? Okay, but I can just fill you in on that, because
Yes.
the first sequences of the falcon attacking the hens meeting. Then at home, she just tells the husband that I think it's time that we have to move. It's very early morning before dawn. So there's no transport. So he starts taking her to the hospital. On the way, he waves to the car and then he says that no, let him go. He's drunk, that driver. So then he reaches to the hospital, and then when he goes to the hospital, he's told that it will be late afternoon or afternoon, by which time we were expecting the wife to deliver. So he goes to the office. And he goes to the office and is in anticipation, he's already carrying the vodka. So he tells the director that I'm sorry, but I know it's not allowed in the office, but this is what is happening. So they all join in good spirits and wish him well. And then he goes to the hospital, they all leave and they wait at his place in the evening, in anticipation of the news. The news arrives, the sister comes and tells him it's a girl. And the wife has earlier also told him that she feels it's going to be a girl. And then he comes home and celebrates, and the boss says that let's get on to first name terms, and can I call you this? So he then calls in, then he breaks down. He's a simple emotional person, tears of joy. So this is how the day begins. Now we have about 6-7 sections in these 5 minutes that you saw. We'll come to that. So it's a very eventful day, for somebody waking up early in the morning. Now what relevance does the first sequence have to the story? Strictly, it doesn't seem to have any connection with the story, but why that sequence has been put there? We'll come to that later, not immediately. At a later point when we discuss about the various other meanings of the scripts and suggestions. So I would also like to have another script, which is another clip, which is Satyajit Ray Jalsagar, again the beginning portion.
Yeah.
In this, again, this is also on YouTube, and I think the subtitles here are built in, so I don't think there would be any problem. Uh, this is again the very beginning of the film, and after the longest title sequence with music, etc., is over, we see this old Jamindar, played by Chobi Vishwas, who's sitting on the terrace, and he is somebody who's completely living in the past. He's completely lost, and time passes very, very, very slowly, and there's actually nothing happens in his life. So it is that kind of a character and that kind of a situation with which Satyajit Ray starts. Again, it starts coincidentally at daybreak, so you can sort of compare and see the various treatments of and then the difference in time, place, characters, etc. How it influences the script and how the story takes on. Vilma, can we have the so? Yes, can I continue, Vilma?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, so this is again, I've described to you the clip, the broad details of it at the beginning, and you can
Yeah.
see the contrast of a lot of action, things happening. It's again 5 minutes of screen time, and two totally different stories, totally different setups. Now the script sets it up, so we'll keep these examples, for the time being, and move ahead and come back to our discussion of fiction, story, and then lead up to the form of the script. And later on, we'll with concrete examples, we'll point out from this particular clips and what is so significant in terms of script that we saw in this. So let's return to the slides story. That's the next slide that will be coming. Yeah, so how is a story born? And as I how is a story born? How was the story born is what I've told you about positive reference and how people consider it as a part of growing up and evolution. And there's a whole discipline that came up in 1970s called narratology, which said that narratives have to be studied and as an independent kind of stream, narratives can be in different forms. And that's they said that narratives have a much wider scope than fiction, and even scientific theories can be like Darwin's theory of evolution can also be considered as as a narrative in itself. So that is what how people have broadened the understanding of the word narrative. But we have to come back to script writing. So now the question that I'm posing is that is how it was in the past, or historically we've come to this. But how is a story born today? And the next slide should tell us more about it. Because when you say how the stories are born, we have to talk about what kind of stories are we showing or are we seeing today. So the kind of stories is the next slide that comes. Where do stories begin? Quite often with gossip. We don't realize, we don't classify it as a story, but quite often gossips are narratives, the stories, with characters. That's why they interest us. In fact, a lot of media thrives also on gossip. Even the mainstream media nowadays has come to thrive a lot on gossip, actually, what we call as gossip. Then you have personal accounts of people, experiences from where one proceeds and make films. Then reports. In newspaper, you read something, and there's a potential somebody sees of developing it into a major film or a story, and people can take off that. Travelogues. Somebody travels to a particular location or person, and then one can see the possibility of making a film. I mean, I remember an example of Andrei Tarkovsky. He was visiting the Sundance Festival, and he went to the famous Monument Valley in USA, and he was accompanied by his friend Polish filmmaker Zanussi. And he looked at the landscape, and he said that what a metaphysical landscape, and what a stupidity to waste it on something called westerns, gunfighting and gunslingers. He said that this is somewhere I would like to make really a deeply felt film. That landscape itself is so inviting in making. So the source of stories can come from variety of things. Then there are chronicles, there are historical chronicles, long stories, folk tales, of course, have been used. I mean, the Russian director Sergei Parajanov used to use a lot of folk elements in stories in his this thing, the fables from Panchatantra and so on and so forth. Myths continue to occupy this thing, particularly mainstream films in Hollywood. In India, we have these two great epics and the myths. Mythological thinking is very, very replete in India. First film, Raja Harishchandra, was the mythological. So that is the beginning of my Indian mainstream cinema. You can see comes out of the mythological format of storytelling. Short story is a modern form, and people have expanded upon that. We have a lot of Indian filmmakers who prominently made films from short stories. Uh, Satyajit Ray is one example. Girish Kasarvalli is another one. I mean, you've taken stories from Premchand, Chekhov, various other people, Indian writers, and who've done that work. Novels, of course, has been an old source. Even from the silent days, people have been adapting novels. I mean, Griffith's Birth of a Nation was developed from a novel in 1914. Same thing with plays, and in fact, there have been some very hilarious things with plays. For instance, can you believe that there was a 10-minute version of Hamlet made in the silent cinema because the dialogues, etc., were not there. But somebody had actually made a 10-minute version of Hamlet in the days of silent cinema. Of course, we are familiar with more modern versions. Musicals have been made from Broadway musicals, have been adapted into films. So plays like Pygmalion, George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion has been made into famous film My Fair Lady. And TV, the last slide, I mean, sorry for the typo. It should have been various formats of film and TV. This gives rise to various formats of TV, what we call about. They contain all these elements, so these are the kind of sources from where we come to. So let's see what's this animal story, how do we define it broadly? There can be varieties of stories. We've seen the kinds of stories, but what is a story essentially? If we take any story, it can be 4 pages, it can be 40 pages, it can be 400 pages. It's a self-contained word in the sense that the first point began with. A story exists for its own self. Literally creates its own world, and that's what a story does. And secondly, it's a subjective experience. Everybody reads the story, and two people who write the story may have liked it for a different reason. The way they see it also in literature is different. I mean, in the sense that you have only mental images of your favorite characters, of the way you visualize someone. Everybody reads the same text but has a different imagery for himself or herself. That is the nature of that experience. Then you see, theme, time, space, plot, characters, they form the content of the story. All stories are about something depicting some human experience, which is broadly what we call themes and sub-themes. They are located in time and space. They happen over a period of time, which is defined by the story. They happen over various places, time and space, which again gets very sort of crystallized in cinema because cinema is a very time-bound medium. Then plot. Now, the difference between story and plot is a higher order. You take a story can be a rambling story. If somebody narrates your story, he will narrate in 15-20 minutes and go into all kinds of details. The writer picks and chooses what and leads it to a dramatic structure, eliminating, selecting, adding, etc. That's what is called as a constructing or arriving at a plot construction from a story. It's a higher form than a story. A story can be rambling, it can be interactive, it can be loose, but not so with the plot. Plot is something that takes the narrative logically from one point to another. Then techniques of storytelling. For instance, what are the basic techniques of storytelling? If you take any story, great story by say Premchand, Chekhov, or any of the contemporary writers, you'll find that there are different parts of storytelling, which is also again come into scriptwriting. For instance, every story will be partially a description of things, events, atmosphere, characters' behavior, etc. Then there is dialogue sometimes, or author uses dialogue between two characters to say something, then returns to descriptions. Then all stories have point of views. Sometimes it is told from what we call as an omniscient author's point of view. Sometimes it's a first person narrative, like you hear the whole story from a character's perspective, like that. It's almost like his autobiographical version, you can say, of that particular character. Now, all stories again are expressions of different cultures and times in history, and yet have a universal appeal. Hamlet appeals to us, Macbeth appeals to us because we see something which is human and something universal and something which transcends time. Otherwise, it's the story of Prince of Denmark. We don't see it as a Prince of Denmark. What connection do we have with the Prince of Denmark in the 16th century? That's not what interests us. But the drama, the intriguing relationship, what happens, the politics involved in it, all that becomes part of it's something that an experience that we can relate to. That's where it becomes universal. Next slide, please. Yeah, a script consists of characters, plot, dialogues, spatiotemporal action, and structure. Now, the difference, where does lie the difference between story and the script in this aspect? Now, this is where we have to look at, and I return to the process of this is to answer this question. I return to our examples. Now, for instance, let's take the first one, which we saw. This is the Polish film, Kieślowski's film. So the first sequence is a falcon hunting and coming in early morning and then suddenly there's a shock, woman wakes up. So there's an ambiguity. Was it a dream that you saw, or was it what you call as a prelude to the main story that the filmmaker has given to us? We wouldn't know. If at this point, if we just seen 5 minutes of the film, but it does raise a question and it does raise a point in your head. Then we see the next sequence is at home. She wakes up. It's a very dramatic moment. The woman wakes up. A woman wakes up. She's excited and she's expecting. So she thinks a big moment has arrived. I mean, in the last days of pregnancy, she would be expecting. So at any time she would be under pressure, and that's exactly where she says the moment happens. The husband wakes up and then starts taking her to the hospital and just lifts her because it's odd time, so no transport is likely to be available at that point. So you have this person again on the way, car stops, but then you find that some drunk returning at starting at very odd hour in the morning. So he just says that he would rather walk. Now, what you notice is that these are small units which we call as sequences in the film. When we come to the next talk about the structure of the script, this term will come in there. So when you go now, the next sequence is he's in the hospital already. Also notice that to speed up the narrative, how the things that that he's reached the hospital. So the entire dialogue that he says that somebody takes charge of her, come and do that. That's not so important. What is important is that the focus is on how husband receives it. So all the time we stay with her. So once he's admitted into the hospital, we don't see her at all, actually, in this segment. So it's only his anxious wait, and then he's told that we're expecting late afternoon. So what is he going to do there? Hanging around. So he goes back to his office. But in the office, he can't concentrate. So we have this office sequence where they actually have a premature celebration, so to say, in the office, breaking all rules and protocols. But it's a special day, so it's allowed. Next, we have him waiting there. Others leave, and the sister comes, and she tells him in the distance. He doesn't react. He's like frozen with joy. Then he kisses his friend. Next, we see straight away they're coming home. People are already waiting. People who left them already waiting for him. We have a celebration. Relations get redefined, and the people come in there. So what the author communicates is not giving us the information, but these are all the emotional high points as he sees in the character's life. So therefore, he's staying very close to the husband, how he perceives is the main character, and how his days goes, and what is this? Where does he work? What is his surroundings? And how they're expressed. And then after this sequence, immediately a little later, 1 minute later, when the people are still there, he takes out a camera that he's bought from somewhere in amateur, and he says that now I can make images of my baby and so on and so forth. So that is where actually the story begins, the next important element. So this first 5 minutes was setting up the stone of the story, telling us who the characters are, what time they're living in, what is this important situation in his life that they've been married, but now he's become a father. So he's got a family now to feed there in the family way, as we say, at this particular point. And at the same time, he's an employee and his work, etc. goes on. All this has been set up in the beginning, also sets the tone of the film. Now, the camera is the second element that arrives in his life, which is going to make a lot of difference to his life. The story begins from or moves on from this point onwards. those of you who are interested, I think, should really in script writing or in film. These films are a must. They're made from very different sources, very different strategies of film. This is his first film, so I hope that it's available on YouTube and with subtitles. So I think be able to follow this up and take it up. So these are this 5 or 6, 7 sequences that we saw. So this is how scripts work in films. I mean, you take an event and time and space wise, as I told you, what we call is this. There are two kinds of narratives, what we call. And this is what the script decides at the level, whether it's linear or non-linear. Linear is something which is consistently forward going, comes from the word line. So this is a linear narrative and it encapsulates what happens in a day in 5 minutes. So the second narrative, that the second example that we come to, Jalsagan, is a non-linear narrative. Because this man's majority of the story takes place in the past. We have about 5 minutes of introduction to his present, where he is, how he is living, etc. And that is where the story begins. Now, this is a complete contrast. This man is frozen in time. And there are two very, very brilliant lines. Quite often we miss them because we think that the dialogues which are really dramatic are the dialogues which are dramatically delivered by actors. That's, I think, a very low form of definition. For instance, the first sentence that he speaks in the film, when he's sitting there, we see a big, huge close-up, very unusual to begin a film. The camera slowly moves out, and the man is lost. He's a vacant stare. He's staring at space. He's staring at nothing in particular. It's very lonely man, very old man, and probably is not radiating any energy. Also that he's a zamindar. Later on, we know that there's hardly any wealth or anything left, except that his own ego and the fact that he has blue blood. That's what this kind of very self-destructive obstinacy that this character has. A very strong character, actually, capable of destroying himself because of his obstinacy. That's how this man is played. So the first line when he speaks in this sequence in the film, he says that what month is this? And then you think a bit about this, and then you realize that this is such a brilliant line that he's come up with. Normally, we ask what day it is, what time it is. The man is so lost with the outside world and his connection is so severe. He says, "What month is this?" Then he says that Falgun. Then he says, "Okay, the spring is here." And then he says, "The flowers are there. Would you be interested?" He doesn't respond, to any of this time. Then later on, the Shehnai, music is one important part of his personality. He's also a musician, and having music and musical kind of sagar that's what the story is about, is to sort of display of his this thing. So when he hears the Shehnai, that's the only thing that he reacts to. He says that he's also a connoisseur. He says that it is Bande Ali's Shehnai. He can recognize from the way it's played. So the servant says yes. Then he says that whose house, what is the occasion? So he says Upanayan, there's a thread ceremony. And then he sits down and comes back, and all is lost, all his family is no more. And when he says thread ceremony, he remembers his own son's story. And then we go into the flashback, and the whole film coming to the present is like coming back from the, from where he was in the past glory, which was also given his wife, his son, etc. at that point, and how he's come to the present from there. So that is how the spatiotemporal structure, what we call the story, which is what we have in literature also, it's like what we call in flashback. And point I'm constantly referring to literature and other narrative arts is because this is not something that cinema develop on its own. This is something that cinema has taken, or cinema has already used as a legacy, of other arts, the flashback and these narrative techniques. So I think for those who want to know script writing should also take up ideally short stories of masters like Maupassant, Premchand, Chekhov, and study these things, various things when he describes, when he uses dialogues, how does it plot move, what is the depth of his characters, etc. Now, so this is how the scripts are written. Now, the difference between story and script is only a blueprint of a film. That's the unfortunate fact, which unfortunate for the many of the writers. Many of the very famous writers in Hollywood as well as in India have had a very disappointing experience with the film industry. There are many reasons for that, but one of the reasons that they had was that they were used to having their own work as the final word. Now, in filmmaking, a scriptwriter does not have the final word. Basically, a script is a blueprint from where the whole film is made. There are several changes. For instance, the stars and the actors coming in make a big difference. For instance, earlier I told you that when you receive a character from literature, it is your own imagination, it's a very subjective experience. And cinema, it is not so. All of you see the same actor playing the same line, and the characterization is realized through the performance of an actor and the presentation of that performance, which is what makes the big system. And in the star system, stars interfere quite often. I mean, there's been complaints, various people have written about it, the studios, and so on and so forth. So it's a mix of a lot of experience, but essentially they wrote. I mean, you cannot write a script. How much of detailing the script would have? For instance, if you write detailing of the actions, you can give broad strokes. But if you give a detailing of what the actor is supposed to do, a good actor will be, a qualified actor will be very upset. He says that don't tell me what my business is. I mean, don't write in terms of like in a novel, his nostrils squared, then you look to the left, then he left his left hand. That will say, this is my business. You're telling me I'm angry, so let me decide how I'm going to get angry, that the actor and director will, sort of look at. The important thing is to create a character and create a kind of a motivation so that the actor and director takes it on from there. So these are some of these major differences, but they're subtle, but they have to be understood, because as I told you that script by itself, see, finally the audience sees the film, not the script. And if the film, like, very few of them will think of that it's because of a good story. So when he says because of a good story or drama and the film goes, I see. So quite often it's a tribute to the actors. But the industry anywhere doesn't. The sad fact is that the writers do not get their due. Actually, quite often when the film is successful, it's usually the others who get the credit. But very rarely you will hear that the script is so good or the writer, is actually given the basis of. That's a sad fact, and those who want to enter this will have to be sort of familiar and be prepared for that. Now let's go to the next stage. That how is the script written? The process of script writing. Of course, it's I can just describe the outward shape and not really go into the examples with details. Of course, that's not possible. Uh, but I think it's good for you to know that the script is written through different stages. The first stage is the idea or synopsis. Uh, which is where you write a one page or two page, idea or elaborate on it. Now, what is this synopsis or idea should be good enough? Again, this is everybody will have a very different method. I'm just generalizing and bringing out the points to you so that, for a beginning, this is the traditional way of for a beginner to go with. And what is it that involved and how it progresses? Some people may not follow this particular pattern at all. So I'm not saying that this is universal, legal, or codified. Some people can have very different ways of that. For our purpose of understanding, it's important to understand that how you sort of present an idea on paper or a synopsis. There are this, when you read a one page or page statement, it's usually the producer, the person who's going to put in the money, or if there's a major actor who's interested, he would be, or a director who would like to take it up. If you are not going to direct it, the writer is not the director, which quite often he's not. So that is where it should give you a basic idea of what happens, where is it happening, who is it about, what is it about, and what is the logic, how does it happen. Then there are additional questions like whether it's a thriller or a romantic story, or it's a spy story, or it's a battle oriented story, or what we call is an action film, or say a romantic comedy, variety of names, sword fighting film, period film, contemporary film, realistic drama, family drama, variety of things with pure entertainment film, with a lot of music and dances and stuff like that. All that form and the definition of the film is given by the script. So therefore, script is basically very, very important. Even though we call it blueprint, it's a very detailed blueprint. In an architecture, the blueprint just is a code that only the architects and the engineers will follow. But the scriptwriter does much more than that. I mean, he or she fleshes out, the nuances of the characters, stories, this, that, and that is where, again, as I said, that you need to go back and study literature. Because if you look at the best of, I think, this is my view that the script writing, reading the script writing manuals becomes useful not for the beginner, but when you've had a little bit of understanding of the film medium and you've seen a little bit of things into that, because each writer is bringing up from his own viewpoint. That may not be the method which is kind of suitable, and the forms of scripts again are different. The middle form is again when somebody approves and says that go ahead and do that. So you write out what you call it loosely as a treatment or a story. We are not yet into sequence or the technical part of it, but it's a more free-flowing description. That's where we call loosely a story. It's not kind of a plot. But this point which I spoke about, who is it about, what is it about, where it's about, and what, etc. That is expanded, let's say, into 8-10 pages now. Let's say from 1 to 2 pages, what it was. So it gives you the suite of the film. And generally the story becomes clear from the beginning, middle, and end, and how it is going to be told, whether it's a linear narrative, whether it's going to work with flashback, who are the principal characters, what are the principal likely locations, is it going to be on the sets and this and that. One should give a basic idea about that, because mind you, filmmaking is an expensive thing. So all the time somebody is calculating costs. When the producer reads, everybody reads the script, mind you. The important point to remember is that everybody doesn't receive the same way. The actors look at it from a different point of view. So do the cameraman, they look at it from the visual style that he's going to give. The set designer looks at it differently. The producer looks at it differently. He looks at it like what will be the outlay, how much of budget I will cost, what is the, where can I get this, so which actors can I sort of find suitable. If I have to get big finance, I have to get stars, then will he agree, will changes would be made. So there's a lot of give and take which takes place. Script writers are asked to modify. Sometimes people have butchered scripts. I mean, there's this book Sidney Lumet has written, Making Movies. All of you should read it. It's meant for, it's written as a textbook. He was the noted director who made variety of films like 12 Angry Men and Murder on Orient Express, Dog Day Afternoon, several worked with very major stars and actors, and describes the process of filmmaking. It's written more or less as a kind of a textbook. And then he says the content that the writers have endured from studios through the years is too well known to discuss again here. I mean, the same idea is given by producer to two writers who are sitting in next room, and they said that two versions and give it this. All the stories in Hollywood as well as in India, we know there's all very famous. So let's not have any illusions. As a writer, if you want to work in the industry, learn, fight your way through by various means, because it's only the success that really people sort of go with. But the fact is that script writing by its own nature also is quite malleable. Then we finally arrive at this level of the script. And I don't have time to really show or present script, but there's a site that I will give you, which is called as a script dash, script as in script dash o letter dash rama, R-A-M-A, scriptorama, like panorama.com, where you'll find this is online. You can download a lot of scripts. These are, in fact, most of them would be Hollywood films there. And they're not, some of them you will not have in final draft, but some of them you'll find still, but the intermediate stuff. You'll find drafts of Godfather, you'll find Psycho, you'll find Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Many noted films, you'll find either the final scripts or the draft on that site. And you can study the format of, how it is written with dialogue. But there's again a Hollywood code. I mean, this is not again universal. Don't make the mistake of having this, that's why I'm not getting into this 3-act structure, 5-act structure, and all. This is like, there's a variety of ways. Not one is better than the other. This is the system.
In fact, yes, in fact, Professor, we would be sharing this link with our participants as well, where they can access the scripts that's been put up on this site. Also, dear participants, we have another 10 minutes for the interaction. So send in us your questions. You can start typing your questions so that we can address your questions at the end of the session.
Okay, so I'm just on to the last few minutes, basically.
Yeah.
So then this is how it happens. Now, let me put in a word about the Indian situation. The Indian situation here, the script is a collaborative effort because India is a multilingual country. So some director who may be from South India is making a film, he's like the story is making, but he's making a film, say, in UP. He is not able to write or understand the nuance of the language. So somebody is employed to write dialogues. Lyricist is, again, if there are songs, is a special position. Every writer is not a poet. He may be writing prose. So you come in. So quite often in India, the script becomes a collaborative effect, which is a very, very specific thing to Indian situation, because sometimes some people would be hired just to write the dialogues, it's a period film, then sometimes you would combine with various people and specific skills are employed. Secondly, Hollywood has this norm, like, a 90-page script from the studio typically means a 90-minute film. A page is a minute. That is not universal again. We don't follow it in India. In other countries, Europe, etc., it's not necessarily true. So these are different systems and different practices that exist in different processes. So the stage 3 is about the script, where you get the description, like I described the 7 scenes in this particular one. It could be instructed. Some of Satyaj Rai's scripts you can see online. He also used to illustrate, the director's script. That's a different thing. That's not part of my distinct. Short breakdown is not really a writer's job. There's the director's job. But Rai was himself from beginning to end. He would work. So some of his illustrations are also available of Padher Panchali, later films, Charulata, some of in his books. He's done the drawing, the characters, etc. I think one should sort of study that. One can only refer to it. Now, it is a script, as I said, this point I've already covered, which covers that shapes the form of the film. Like I've been giving examples, whether it's a realistic film, non-realistic film, genre films, experimental films. I've just spoken about these two films as examples, within that you can see that how the difference stems from the fact that how the spatiotemporal structure is given to the films by the filmmakers. Now, sources of film narratives, I think we've spoken about it, the kinds of this, so I will not repeat that. The last point that I want to sort of round up this discussion is that a lot of literature, a lot of work in film is what we call as an adaptation. So, no, this is the penultimate point. The last point I want to come to is that what are the qualities that we are looking at the script writer? Anybody wants to take up script writing serious way? What is it that you should really be sort of cultivating within yourself? So the adaptation usually becomes a contentious issue quite often, and because people like to compare it with the original, or the novel is better, the film. This is a debate that you will hear all the time. I think what, as a writer, you got to remember is that all adaptation is transformation from one form to another. There's no sort of two ways about it. So when a film is adapted from a play, a story, or a novel, or any such source, a new work of film artwork is coming into film. So remember that when people who seen adaptations of Shakespeare's plays on film, they far outnumber the people who originally seen the plays or even read them. Secondly, it's not even necessary for an audience. Even if you go to see War and Peace film, which Hollywood's made a version of that, it's not mandatory for you to be familiar with the original work. No, none of the audiences are really going to first read a novel or a play and then you go. There will be a small section of the audience which will do that, but maybe out of academic or other interests. But that's not a precondition. So the audience receives it as a complete thing in itself. Audience is not bothered about the source or where it has come, But so therefore the adaptations thing. So there isn't that parent-child relationship or a master-slave relationship, which sometimes in the writing it seems like implicit in several people. I don't think that really is a criterion, and you have to be very free. And quite often filmmakers are charged. That's again a major debate. I'm not getting into that, but if you read Satyaj Rai's films, in defense, he was attacked by a writer for departing from the original. And he got very angry. And, he wrote a very detailed, account of why he made the changes. I think in Charulata, and large 20-25 page this thing, and it's a very wonderful insight into what he does. Also, in one interview that he gave, he said that when adapting, he said that I read the original once. And it's the second time I read it if I like the story. And he said, usually my mind is made up in the second reading of the story. After that, he said, I do not touch the story at all, no matter it is by whom, whether it's by Tagore or by any other writer. He said, I go my own way. After that, he said, I absolutely keep it aside, which means what? The writer is feeling free to go ahead. If you look at Kurosawa's work also, number of departures from the original, that is necessitated by variety of reasons. First of all, it's basically what is suitable for one medium is not necessarily suitable. I mean, if you read Dostoevsky's novels, some of his characters sit there and give long monologues. In cinema, it doesn't quite work that way. Or some of these very lyrical descriptions of a character's thoughts, they're very difficult to bring out on screen. And I think, let me give you an example again of Padher Panchali. A lot of people do not realize the novel, those who read the novel is so full of subplots and so many beautiful images of nature and so many other characters and all. Why I think it was an example of remarkable maturity and insight for somebody making his first film. He just stuck to the family and he's built a world around the family, and the surroundings come in of the villages and other things as an extended world of the family. I think that is what has contributed a great deal in the understanding of the film work. It's a masterstroke in terms of adaptation and filmmaking from somebody who's making his first film. That makes it all the more laudable in this case. So then the characters, actions, and places in the story are imaginary for the reader. For a film viewer, they're embodied by actors and they're real. So hence, the interference can come in from stars and actors at various points, of which there are a number of examples. Then there's quite often major changes of time and space and culture into which the story is adapted. From examples you would have seen in India, I just referred to him. I mean, if you look at Macbeth, you can see them. Makbul, a lot of people in India would have seen. Vishal Bhargava places in the gangland Mumbai, and then you have Kurosawa doing it in completely different context in Japan, medieval Japan, and Makbul is done in India in the format of the Bombay commercial film by Vishal Bhargava, where you have a crime film, underworld, and in that context he places the same story, the source, but you have very different films coming from there. So that's exactly what adaptation, the freedom of adaptation, is about. Okay, now to end my presentation finally, you can see what are the various things. I mean, you can relate to what I've been saying, and your take home from this would perhaps be like first requirement if you want to understand script writing. That's why I mentioned even City Limits and other books, which gives the idea of screenwriting. You have to understand the technical processes of how cinema works and what is the writer's this thing. So understands the technical process of filmmaking. Secondly, inculcates narrative thinking into the self. So the earlier part, when I was showing you one idea, how it takes different forms, the comparison I gave you, about the design of Napoleon's expedition, a novel comes out of it and a graphic story comes out of it, in a very different format. So when you start perceiving and seeing these things, you sort of open yourself up to narrative thinking. This is like, your mind also has to be trained imaginatively. These are the small little exercises that we keep doing. Like athletes train physically, we train mentally, quite often. Then you have to be aware of the filmmaking traditions. When you got to be able to, you got to know film history, at least a broad outline. When you're placing a film, the musical of American musical of 1950s and the Indian cinema of 1950s, what it was like. So you have to know that this particular film uh, exists is a product of certain times. The themes, the treatment, the technological development. The films were black and white, outdoor locations. Most of the 50s outdoor locations and films shot on outdoor, very less, because the portable equipment and other things were not there. So people were bound to shoot in studio films. This you got to be able to relate and understand. And then aware of the various traditions, you have to be aware of the various traditions of narration and realization of script writing. It's a practical discipline. When you're writing for Indian cinema, why the song and dance? And some of the old scripts and the studio scripts, you'll find that there is a logic to the songs. Unlike a lot of films today, a song is just put in there as an item or as a commercial thing there. But if you look at the films of, say, the best, say, Bimal Roy or Raj Kapoor or Gurdat, you'll find a song. If you take a song out of there, there will be a hole in the film. Song forwards the story quite often, forward. So it's conceived as a part of this. The writer may not write it, but the situation is written for the song. The lyricist may come and write actually the song and provide the words for the tune. That's a later part, but it's also part of the script writing. So these are these four very broadly speaking challenges that an area. And mind you, it's not easy. It doesn't come in a day, and you can't sort of give up, because if you read Satyaj Ray's own version, before he met Pather Panchali, he was doing this when a film was being Hollywood film, he said, was being made. He would read the original novel, write his own screenplay, then go and see the film and compare it like that. So, of course, there were no institutions and other things that day to do that, but it was his own initiative. So, similarly, those who will be having the advantage of learning in an institution, well and good. But otherwise, these are some methods, but even when you're studying in the institution, you can develop and follow your own methods. But these are the things that you will have to be just doing. Just mere talent and perseverance is not enough. You have to work with a certain discipline. You have to develop the skills and this awareness. So, okay, that's all from me. So, if you have any questions or other things, we'll take it up. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely,
Awesome.
Professor Anil, giving us the entire, I mean, whatever you have said definitely means a lot. And thank you very much for taking us through the entire process, as in when we have the story, how do we narrate it? From narration, getting into the sources, like where do we get these stories from? And then getting into the adaptation, concept of adaptation, and also treatment of these adaptation. Also, thank you for giving us those clips where you could visually explain it to our participants, the importance of scripting and how the narration can be done through shots. It's been a wonderful session interacting with you. In fact, here there are few questions addressed to you. So this very first question that I would like to ask you is from the point of view of a teacher. I see a lot of students getting up with a fresh idea. And now, thanks to digital technology, where the source is very much available for the students, and even with the technology, like just with the mobile camera, they can go ahead and shoot it. So most of the students come to us discussing the idea. The next stage that we tell them is, why don't you write it down? Put it in the form of a script. So, what is the importance of scripting, especially if someone wants to narrate a story in times of digital age?
See, I think digital makes no difference at all, because it's just another format. And earlier you were using film, you're making digital. So in this area, nothing has changed. This is one area which gives the basic soul to the story in filmmaking. How would see the character, acting, story, all that would remain the same. The format will change. Yesterday you were using film, today you use digital. Tomorrow it will be some other format. But ultimately, what are you doing? You are telling the story. There's no getting away from that. And what has changed? The story evolution. That's why I went into the evolution of the story. So the task for the writers mercifully do not change. For the cameraman and other thing, they have to adapt to a new technology, see the different format, the editors and all. Yes. But even then, they will tell you that what they're doing is a new business, with new tools, basically. There's no getting away from the fact that you have to be aware of the narrative at its broad sense, how the script works. Some of the editors will tell you that what we do in editing is, it's like rewriting the script. And there is some truth in that, because the script writing, you began with intentions. Okay, this is where you will go. But now you actually got the material in hand. That's why the editor comes in at the later stage. He's not involved in scripting and all. He is somebody who says that, okay, these are the intentions, but now this is what I've got in hand. So whatever we do, we make the best out of this. So it is literally true that we are rewriting the script, but now with very concrete shots in your hand. So it doesn't change. I mean, the task remains the same. Technology doesn't affect.
Also, adding to it, many think that when it comes to working on documentary, it require a script. What's your take on it?
I said in the beginning that it's a complex area. It depends again area. I don't want to go into non-fiction because non-fiction is a different area. It depends on the kind of documentary you're making. For whom are you making the documentary? For what purpose you're making the documentary? Are you making a biographical film? Then a lot of research is required. Are you making a film, on a phenomenon which is nascent and it is developing? Then you keep shoot and then you keep thinking as you go. The modern documentary, the tight scripts are not written as much as written, but it depends. If you're making a film on, say, if you're making an instructional film or an educational film, where it's mostly the input is one way, you're explaining a process and technical thing, instructional thing, then it would be very tightly scripted, But that rarely happens in an open documentary, which sort of looks for debates and other things. A lot of it happens actually as you're going. But what is more important, what is I think very important, is that my experience is that, because I've done mostly documentaries, in fact, is that the narrative thinking helps you in documentaries. If you're taking an interview, then you are thinking about, while the person is talking and is saying that, you can't have talking heads all the time on the screen. It becomes boring. So how are you going to illustrate it? Meaning, how are you going to find a narrative for his words, etc. So the narrative thinking, therefore, I'm underlining that point again and again. If you start developing that attitude, it sort of helps you. There are different applications than you would be able to find.
Okay. Also, while working on the script, especially when it comes to adaptation or maybe giving the director's point of view, how do we work on the narration, especially highlighting the creativity, the concept of creativity in the story narration?
Story narration, you mean personally, telling to
Yes,
people.
as a script writer. Now I have an idea. I want to narrate the story. Probably I've taken the adaptation from a book. So how do I bring in the creativity without affecting much on the adaptation?
Well, it's a creative process all the way through, because that's exactly where I spoke about the synopsis stage. That you're talking about a synopsis stage, you have to get people interested. So you have to size up what is it that will perk up interest. So what you're doing is, like when you write papers, academic papers, a story, we present an abstract. So your synopsis in that way is like an abstract. In a nutshell, you are getting. So these are the high points of the story. So, for instance, let me give you an example. All ideas do not start necessarily, for instance, as a thing. But Chaplin made this famous film, Monsieur Verdoux, which was based on
Yeah.
this Bluebeard story, one better, he had seven women and married them and changed identities and so on and so forth. So this was a story that really happened. And one day he was meeting Orson Welles in a cafe. And Orson Welles just told him that this is something, up your line. Why don't you make a film on that? And he actually, Chaplin started thinking about it. It was not his original idea. Then he thought about it, and then he came up with the film. So therefore, in the beginning of the film, there is a recognition of that, an acknowledgement of that. He says that based on an idea suggested by Orson Welles. Chaplin did the scripting and everything himself, but the acknowledgement of where the idea and the source that came from, that comes there. So how the important point is right at the synopsis level is that of narration and everything, it has to sound personal. It may be an adaptation you're doing, but you have to own it up. You're not trying to follow the writer. What have you got out of that? Then it becomes your story, and then it becomes interesting, and that doesn't happen so easily. You have to work a lot on this. In the synopsis, particularly for work that exists, you have to work a lot. What is it relevant? How are you going to make it relevant, to your times, to what setup you're working in? Who would be interested in that? All a little bit, not a little bit, quite a bit of thought has to go into that when you present a synopsis or narration, because you get 10 minutes. Quite often, people are very busy. So in 10 minutes, you have to, impress, or you have to get people involved or interested in that. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get a second chance with the same person.
Right. Also, you told us the importance of knowing literature, especially when it comes to a writer. So, are there any recommendations that you would like to give, especially for the budding script writer? What are the books that they should be
I've
referring, or
always
what are the
mentioned
books?
these writers. I mean, they're all available online now. A lot of
Hmm.
Premchand stories are even translated in English. Chekhov is there, Maupassant is there. You take the small stories and apply this criterion, like what we said. What is the viewpoint? How well you use dialogue? What we call is a close reading. And if you read a little literature on analytical segments on this thing, etc., it will help. But basically, what is the character about? How you go into the details of the characters? Why does he say, the things that there in the construction of the writer? It would show you the narrative frame of mind, because the same techniques we apply to films in a different form, of course, but then it is a legacy of literature. That's why I start. I mean, the time and space, or what
Yeah.
period the story takes place, whether it's linear, non-linear, all that is there.
And just to put it in simple words, most of the writers face this problem of writer's block. So when it comes to script writing, suppose one goes through such phase, how do they handle it? How do they come out of it and make sure the idea is delivered in writing?
Um, Complicated question, and no standard solution, unfortunately, is available for it. But I can tell you the example of one great master. We had a meeting with Kurosawa when we were students. He came to Delhi Festival, and we asked him the usual question, very broad and silly question of people who are, very enthusiastic but less knowledgeable, very, very less knowledgeable, little knowledgeable about cinema. So, how do you write your script? It's a gross question, but he told us very simply. He said that. Very simple. Go to the table, take out a piece of paper, Nothing comes to your mind, write, fade in, and start writing beneath that, and don't stop. He said every day you must write one page at least. And he says that what if you write? I know what's in your mind. He said that what if I write rubbish? He said there is a waste paper basket. He said that tear it off. He said that some of my early works which I wrote and showed to my this thing, when I think of that, to my teacher, that's what he was saying. He said that I was very, very embarrassed, when I think of that, actually, what I wrote. So the point is that you have to waste a lot of effort and time, which is not really a waste, to make those mistakes and do that. So one has to sort of keep trying. Maybe see something which you relate to. If you get, I mean, all of us face this problem of being the writer's block. The reason maybe in your personal life or wherever, it's very hard to say what causes the writer's block. Sometimes the writer might be there. It might be better to keep it aside. Try and do something which occupies you. It depends on individuals. This one, but some people, some of these writers, for instance, they keep a diary. Like some of the novelists, while they are writing, they have kept the notes and these have also been published. It gives a lot of insight into their mind, how you sort of go about. You got to keep chipping. I mean, that's the general answer. I can't give very specific solutions to that.
Yes. So with this brilliant tip, Professor Anil, we would be ending this masterclass. Thank you so much once again for joining us here today, especially for the masterclass, where you delivered the entire concept of script writing effectively, especially to our participants. Thank you.
Hope
And
so.
thank you all the participants. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you, participants, for joining us from different parts of the world. In fact, we have another masterclass lined up next week where we will be interacting with the sound person who's worked in the field of music, especially in Bollywood. That is Daniel B. George. We would be updating the date and time, everything on our official Facebook page of Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Dubai. Also, dear participants, all the recording of our masterclass sessions will be made available to you all, especially on the public platform. Thank you once again for joining us here for this session. Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Dubai has been known for receiving a 5-star rating from KHDA for its service, for its references, and for all the facilities and infrastructure. So, BA in Media Studies, specially offered by the School of Media and Communication, is a very vast program focusing on different aspects of filmmaking, television production, journalism, online writing, script writing, public relation, event management, and so on. So those who are interested to know about more about our courses, do visit our campus at Manipal Academy of Higher Education in the weekdays. You can also visit us during our open house sessions, which will happen every Friday here in our campus from 4 to 8 p.m. Also, for more details, do visit our website www.mahedubai.com or our official Facebook and Instagram handles. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.